So an ethical leader looks at what significance am I going to make? That's how he measures himself or herself. Significance in terms of the people, the impact I'm going to make in the lives of people, and how am I going to develop people, how am I going to make them to achieve their talents and potentials and really achieve their significance in life. And that is a more valuable measurement that one you need to put in.
You really have to know the difference between right and wrong. In your life, you have to know the difference between right and wrong. You do wrong things, they will catch up with you. If you perhaps unfortunately pass away, they will catch up with your children.
There are choices that we make for ourselves every single day. Every single day, we are faced with this choice versus that choice. And you've got to really think about your choices, about your life and how you manage your life and your career and your aspirations and what you want to do with yourself. It is a really active process. Every day, at least I believe so, every day it's about actively managing what I want to do.
When you sit down and you face your day, just be sure of what your compass needle is telling you. What is your direction? What are your values? Remember those. That is your guide. And if you make decisions, all of your decisions in relation to your matrix of values, then you'll be okay. You'll do the best you can. That's the best you can do. You can't do better than that.
We must know what we stand for. We must know what we represent. We must know what we want to achieve. And we must be able to extricate ourselves so that we don't believe that we become infallible or irreplaceable.
But integrity is wholesomeness. So that what you think, say, and do, it's one and the same thing. You don't show up differently. That what people see is what they get. They don't have to second guess you.
Leadership is service. It's selfless service of the people that you lead. It is owning the decisions that you make. It is being humble enough to recognize the mistakes that you make.
So you must be able to build that self-recovery mechanism within you to always bounce back, to never allow people to write you off, and because you remember what I said, that your dream may be delayed, but it can never be denied.
So we're pioneering, we're bold, we are ever evolving, we are ever innovating. Very, very important characteristics, in my view, for an entrepreneur. If you want to remain relevant and stay ahead of the pack, just because you were the best yesterday doesn't mean you're going to be the best tomorrow. So you have to constantly be challenging yourself and saying, what am I going to do differently tomorrow? What am I going to do differently tomorrow? What new product am I going to bring in? So that when your competition is trying to catch up with you, you've moved on, you're one step ahead.
We can all say that we have values, but it's only seeing how we behave we can tell if those values are working or not. There's a very important connection. Behaviours are so much more visible in terms of how people do things.
And along the way, you will have all sorts of barriers. You will have barriers of financial resources. You will have barriers of not even have enough knowledge in the subject that you want to handle. But if you stick to the plan, and you are enthusiastic enough, sufficiently enthusiastic, then you are going to achieve your goal.
ULP family, I hope and pray that you and your loved ones are healthy, strong, and well during this lockdown period. I know it is a very frustrating period, it's a boring period. You don't know what to do with yourself sometimes, but it is necessary. The coronavirus has created unprecedented global crisis. Nothing like this we've seen in our lifetime. In fact, history books are going to record this story. It has created so many challenges for all of us, both medical challenges and economical challenges. But our president acted swiftly, decisively, by announcing the lockdown and then follow up with a massive screening and testing process, which will help trace and treat those that are infected. Our numbers are already increasing. And sadly, we also have fatalities. We need to think about those that have lost their loved ones, not only in our country, but throughout the continent and throughout the whole world. I ask you and urge you as a ULP leader to support our president by continuously staying at home. Wash your hands regularly. Sanitize your home. Make sure that when you've got a flu-like symptoms, you get yourself isolated quickly. Save lives and preserve life. And do everything you have to make sure that we stop the spread of this virus. Because if you don't, it's going to overwhelm our health system, collapse our economy. We will have a catastrophe in our nation. We don't want that. And I'm convinced and convicted that we will defeat this virus if we all become united in fighting it. Now, coming back to us as ULP, every first Thursday of the month, we meet, reflect, learn, listen to speakers, talk about leadership lessons. Unfortunately, now it's a lockdown. We cannot do that. We cannot meet at ULP House. We cannot have our time of learning and fellowship and asking questions and continuously learning and improving our own leadership talents and gifts and skills. But thank God that we have now 4IR. I must say it has come much more faster than I thought. I thought it's going to come in 20 years' time, but it is now. We now can continue with our ULP session because we cannot stop learning and improving and self-development, particularly our leadership talents and skills and competence. We have decided that we will continue with ULP online sessions every first Thursday of the month during this lockdown. And today, we are going to listen to a video of a ULP session with Mr. Phuthuma Nhleko. It was filmed in 2016. The reason I've chosen this one in particular is that it's got timeless leadership lessons that are extremely profound. Every time I listen to it, it actually continues to inspire me and help me to reflect on my leadership journey. I therefore ask us to listen, learn, reflect, and engage. Thank you very much.
Before I introduce our speaker, I just want to remind you the challenge I gave you last time. We all see whenever you read the newspapers and you read social media and you read anything about our country today, it's almost like we're spiraling down into a deep hole.
And, but it is important that we who are here, jeepers, I can see Mark Malota all the way from Polokwane. That's wonderful. Eh? Gee, that's wonderful. It's good to see you, my brother. We need to keep, what is the real job of a leader is, one of them is to be a hope bearer. A hope bearer, because otherwise we're going to get into a depressed syndrome and the whole country is just going to go down the drain. And so we need to hold hope. And the hope that we have is in the National Development Plan. And I looked at this. This plan was drafted for 2030, and I counted and said, this is 2016. So it's only 14 years left. Am I right? Is my math right? Tell me you're a math man. Am I right? And some of us actually, by that time, would have long retired. Nhleko, 15 years from now, we would have retired. But it's you who needs to make sure that this vision happens. Most of you who are young, and we know the key challenges facing this country is poverty, unemployment, and inequality, and we have to tackle these challenges. If we don't, is what we're going to see in Hammanskraal, we see in the Limpopo, we see it all over this country. And I asked you to go and read the chapters of NDP. Where are we? All right, move on. Yeah, and we said lots of them there. There's about 13 chapters, if I'm not wrong. Economy and employment, South Africa in the region and the world, social protection, economic infrastructure, transforming human settlements, building safer communities, environmental sustainability, improving education, building a capable and developmental state, inclusive rural economy, healthcare for all, fighting corruption, and nation building, and social cohesion. And we ask people to choose. But after reflecting, I realized that it's going to be very difficult to do all these things. And I decided that I can't count more than 5, so let's choose 4. And because once you do too many things, it's not going to work. So the next slide there, can you go on? I said, I think the most important one is the economy and employment. Do you agree? The statistics that have come up that the employment rate is just going up and up, but even more important is young people who are unemployed. And the second one is economic infrastructure, and the third one is education, and the fourth one is fighting corruption. Corruption is our enemy number 1 now. It's becoming so cancerous that if we do not actually uproot it, we're going to be a failed state. But I believe that you and I can play our role in fighting it and making sure that we do not become a failed state. So what I want to do is, last time I said everyone must choose out of so many, and there's just too many groups, but I just want 4 groups now. So I want you to make up your mind which of these groups you want. I want to form teams of people that will work out of these 4: economic and employment, economic infrastructure, improving education and training, and innovation, and fighting corruption. And decide in your mind right now, where are you going to like to be part of the team? We want to form 4 teams. ULP now is so Theo, we're doing quite a lot of things other than just these events. This event is just a platform. 4 teams that are going to focus on these areas. So let me get a sense of those who would be interested in the first one, economy and employment. Right? There's too many people. Well, just all right, keep you down. That means those who are interested in infrastructure. Okay, great. Those who are interested in improving education, training, and innovation. Wow, great. Those who are prepared to fight corruption. Okay? Choose one, please. Choose one. Because what I want to do after this is that normally after the end of this session, we all come and greet each other and come and greet our speaker and shake hands. But I want you to do that for only about 10 minutes or so. I want each, decide right now, if you're in economy or economic infrastructure, I want you, when you leave this place, thank God today is Friday, so we're not rushing to tomorrow. Normally we have these events on Thursday, so everybody wants to run. So tomorrow is Saturday, so you can chill out a little bit. We've prepared rooms in the ULP house of these 4 groups. And you will be led by Theo and Mandla and Mugelane. They will take you to that group. And now listen very carefully what I want you to do, because I want to create a movement that will focus on implementing NDP. We've got too many policies here now. We just need to choose one and just implement. And there's a whole country trying to do it, but ULP, let's play a little bit our place, our role in the area in which we are. So go up to the next slide. Spa. Yeah. These are the instructions. Break into 4 groups based on the identified focus area that you have. So you've already chosen your area. And then what I want you when you're in those groups to identify 2 or 3 priority action or item that needs to be done in order to make sure that that happens. Remember, I sent you, most of you have received, how many of you have received yeah. And then decide who will do what by when. And then prepare a presentation to deliver at the next ULP session. So in the next ULP session, we'll have a little bit of time where we'll maybe have 1 or 2 groups that are ready just to share what they are doing or what they're planning to do. At some point, we will feed into the National Planning Commission. We will also invite the leadership of the National Planning Commission to come here, because each one of us must make a contribution. And so in that group, when you are there, for today, because it's a start, just you'll have a piece of paper where you've got all your names and addresses, form a WhatsApp group, select a convener of the group, and then from there start talking to each other throughout the whole month, so that when we meet next you've got something. If you want to decide to meet here to arrange and have that group discussion alone during the week or one of the Saturday or Sunday, just phone Theo. We'll make this venue available for you. If you want to meet at your offices or at your own boardrooms, please do that and invite as many people to participate in gaining this momentum of implementing this. We only have 14 years to go. It's a very short space of time. Are we together? Are you with me? Are you committing? No, I want people to show commitment. You know how I want. Are you with me? Show by show of hands? Yeah? Yeah, I can see. No, you see, some of us are used to making sure that people commit right up front. Now let me introduce our speaker. Phuthuma. I've known Phuthuma for many, many years. We've been together at the beginning in the oil game, and we share a vision which we say one day, before we go and be with the Lord, we have a vision of creating a major. You see, I say these things on record. Black-owned, black-controlled institution in the oil and gas or energy sector. So, because we've spent almost all our working life in that space. He's also diversified extensively. But he's a chairman and a co-founder of Pembane Group. Pembane was formed in 1994. It's become a very successful BE startup company. And I think it moved from worldwide into Pembane. And as you know, most of the assets of our current deputy president have been bought by Pembane. And Pembane focuses on cement, resources, energy-focused investment holding. He was a chairman of MTN, and he retired And then MTN faced a major challenge, and he was called back. And as a CEO, he tells me now that he's almost there to appoint the CEO, and then from there, he's going to regain his life again. He's up until last month, has been on BP PLC. You know what PLC means? Does it mean BP South Africa? It means BB globally, worldwide. He was on the board of that up until last month, and he says he only retired because he wants to have his life back. He was also a PLC Anglo-America. So that's a great achievement. Let's give him a round of applause. And that's what Unleashing Leadership Potential is about, is that you dream big. Not only, we all grew up in townships, in Katlewong, national, international, globally. That's where we need to be. He was a CEO of MTN, and I salute him for that because he built a major company there. He's been on directorships, Nedbank, Old Mutual, Jonic, Bidvest, Alexander Forbes. And as we say in ULP, we encourage people who've studied. So he has done an MBA at Atlanta University, and is a qualified civil engineer from Ohio State University. Phuthuma, over to you.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say it's really an honor and a privilege to stand in front of you. Maurice told me about Unleashing Leadership Potential probably about 18 months ago. And he invited me to come and share some views and my own little life history with you. And I agreed to do that. But most unfortunately, on 2 occasions, I could not honor that due to some circumstances beyond my control. So I apologize for that. But nonetheless, I am here in front of you today. As I have been advised, this is almost a 2-aspect discussion. One is to give just a little bit of history on oneself, and then more importantly, contextualize that history in addressing the issue of leadership, which is a big topic, broad topic, and I guess if you had 10 people up here, you'd get 10 different versions of what leadership is. My own life started in Guatemala, in Springs, in the early 60s, where my father used to work for I think those days it was called Liver Brothers, and eventually became Unilever. My mother is from Attridgeville in Pretoria. At one stage, after studying in UNISA, he got a scholarship, my father, to go and study in the US. It was the African Methodist Church. And that's how he ended up in Indiana, and ended up doing a master's in sociology there. Then, of course, when he came back, 65, 66, I think during those days, as a black person with a degree in sociology, there wasn't too much for you to do here. And that's how we ended up resettling in Swaziland. And I eventually managed to get to the US, and I think as you've seen from the short bio, I studied civil engineering at Ohio State University, and eventually graduated, worked in the States for a few years, came back. At that stage, I think there were very few black civil engineers in South Africa. In fact, I think you had to get permission from the Department of Education to study civil engineering, let alone work as an engineer. With all your degrees. So I worked in Swaziland for 2 years, building roads, infrastructure, and so on. And once I was doing that, it came to me to say, I'm actually quite inadequate as regards the financial aspects of contracting. And that is when I decided to go and do an MBA. And of course, if you recall, in the 80s, the combination of MBA and engineering was very much in vogue. So I went back to the US, did that. And as I got the combination of engineering and investment banking was actually at its apex. I think the investment bankers found out, with all due respect to the accountants in the room, that if you want a great investment banker, you must get the engineers. And in a sense, I do understand why. I think it is very much a resolution-oriented discipline as opposed to a structured discipline like accountancy and so on. And I take nothing away from the CAs and the CFAs. But it was great. And then on coming back into South Africa, this was now 1990, I worked at Standard Merchant Bank as an investment banker. At that stage, I think it was probably myself and a gentleman called Joe Makobe, who were the only black people in investment banking then. He was at First Corp, and so on. One thing led to the next, and I'm really compressing 30 years into 5 minutes. And I then went and started a company called Worldwide African Investment Holdings. It was myself. I don't know if you recall, he's now late, God bless his soul, Max Marcella. Yeah. Max Marcella, myself, Ngula, Kai Ngula, and Professor Nkutlu. And quite frankly, we started off with 20,000 rand. It's all documented, it is all there. And next thing is we had to bond our houses and so on and so on. So I can tell a long story on that. And eventually in 2000, I think in 2000, we had built up a balance sheet and we were keen to try and buy Nail. Nail was a BE group that was started by Dr. Moklana and the Chief Justice, or Deputy Chief Justice, who just retired this week, Tegang Mseneke. And those who have got long enough memories will remember that we thought the deal was all done and all of that. And one Sunday evening, they had a meeting, and I lost out on that deal, and the deal went to Mr. Saki Makrozoma. I mean, this is all public information. I'm not too sure what happened to Nail after that, but anyway, that's a different discussion. I was then asked to come and chair MTN because MTN had been part of Jonic. And as I said, this is a long story. I could write a book about that. So I agreed to chair MTN 2000, 2001. 2001 at the end, they said, well, you've been a great chairman, why don't you become CEO? So I'm going the wrong direction now. So I agreed to do that. And at that stage, it was just South Africa, I think Uganda, and maybe Swaziland. And we grew MTN from that into 22 countries in Africa and the Middle East. It became effectively the fourth largest company in South Africa. The other three were all listed in London. They'd moved. It was Richmond, SAB, Miller, and so on. And as I say, that in itself is quite a long story. You know, that journey of 10, 11 years, stretching all the way from South Africa to Nigeria to Afghanistan to Syria, is a story in itself, which I'd be more than happy to share with you, one day. I don't think we have the time to do it today. So that is really, I think, my history in a nutshell. If I have to come back to really the essence of today's topic, which is unleashing leadership potential, I made an effort of trying to reflect in a manner that I could try and have a concise view, as relatively concise as I can, on my perception of what leadership potential is. And I guess every book on leadership will give you a different perspective. And I think on reflecting on that, I ended up with shall I say, 7 cardinal points that I thought were pivotal. The first one is a worldview. I do think that unless you have a worldview, it is difficult to deal with the other 6 steps. And to have that worldview, I think a good sense of history and a good sense of economics is essential. And just not to be misunderstood, I'm not therefore saying, you have to go into school and study history and go and study economics. You'll be amazed at the number of self-educated people who've never really been into any tertiary institution of any sort, but have made it their business to educate themselves and end up with a coherent view of the world. Because without a coherent worldview, I don't think you can formulate anything. I don't think you can formulate a cohesive foreign policy for a country, for instance, if your worldview is disaggregated and not coherent and not composite. So I think that is very, very, very important. That's item number 1. Item number 2 is then vision. Having had a composite worldview, what is your vision? And most enormous and fantastic achievements always start with a vision. And that vision can come in many forms. It can come as Akhenaten did, for instance, who was the first pharaoh to believe in a single god, which was the sun in his particular case. Radical. So you've had all these pharaoh dynasties for thousands of years. And here comes Akhenaten and says, no, we are actually going to have one God. Okay, in his particular case, it was the sun. Absolutely radical change. And the consequences of that is history lessons for years and years that we can discuss. Einstein did not do an empirical experiment to come with the formula E is equal mc squared. It was vision. Now, I'm not saying he just woke up. Yes, he was a scientist working the Technikon in Germany and so on. But, and I don't think, by the way, him being appointed or nominated as person of the century, you may remember year 2000, he was on Time magazine as the person of the century. Personally, I fully agree with that. Here is somebody conceptually, right, through a lot of thinking, not empirical experiment, but a lot of it was insight. Yes, he had some basics to use with it, but he arrived at that formula in an intuitive manner. And it's vision. And I can go on and on and on and on. I mean, those who study the Bible, and I'm not pretending to be an authority by any stretch of the imagination, but will know that if Paul didn't basically take a view on reestablishing Christianity, we probably would not be sitting around here. So there's a whole series of people that have a vision that is actually cogent. It starts off with a worldview, and then you have the vision. Then I'd move on to item 3. Now you've got a vision. You can have a vision and remain on your bench indefinitely and nothing will happen. You need a framework. And whether you are a politician who decides you're going to be EFF, or you are a general who decides we need to annex this land, or you are, take whatever entrepreneur that you want. Who's the guy who does Virgin? Branson. There is a framework there. There had to be a conceptualized framework of saying, how do I go from a vision to a framework? And that framework deals with every possible resource and how you deploy that resource within that framework in order to achieve the vision. Then in my view, I think you go to item 4, which is capability and quality of individuals. Out of everything that I have tried to do in my short life, I have found that even when there may be an error in the framework, if you have the right capability and capacity from a people perspective, it really makes a big difference. You can have a poor idea and great capability and excellent people, you will eventually get there. It may go through a zigzag, and you may eventually get there. You can have an absolutely fantastic vision, a flawless framework, but if your judgment of people and choice of people is poor, you achieve nothing. So, in my mind, part of that element 4 of capability and quality is the whole issue of judgment. I mean, there's somebody who I wasn't a fan of. She once said something that I actually thought, well, she's actually right on this. And that was Margaret Thatcher, who I used to really detest for all sorts of reasons. But she used to say, you know, at any day, she'd rather have somebody who's got excellent judgment than somebody who's brilliant. And I absolutely agree with that. The number of people that I've met whose capability is beyond question, but have got poor judgment, basically mean that the capability aspect of your framework and eventually your vision doesn't come to pass. Then I'd come to item 5. So you've got your vision, you've got the framework, you've now employed the best people that you can, whether it's a political party, whether it's an army, whether it's a business, or whatever it is. You've now amassed close to you some very capable people, and you're ready to move forward. And you need to get input. Now, I honestly believe strong leaders surround themselves with absolutely strong and difficult people. And weak leaders surround themselves with weak people. And the reason is one of deeper sense of confidence and input. And personally, I believe in what they call the Socrates method, where you can sit in a boardroom or in whatever forum and you can have all the answers, and you tell, you must do this, Simpiwe, you must do that. No, Maurice, you must do that. Or you can just keep on asking questions, and that's how Socrates used to behave philosophically. Make input by asking questions, and you still get input. But the difference is that you get genuine input from those people. And you also even get contrarian views. Once you start closing out the contrarian views, and that is the beginning of the end. I mean, taking MTN as an example, we moved from a very localized South African provincial mentality, all right? By the time I left in 2011, we had like 50,000 employees, maybe 35, 45 different nationalities. How somebody thinks from KZN is quite different from how somebody from Kabul in Afghanistan think, right? It's a totally different culture, and for you to have that ability to absorb that culture and be a listening post, I think you definitely emit and amass and end up with the best sort of decisions. So that point 5 really is just, I just call it the Socrates method of keep on asking the questions, do the listening as opposed to give instructions. Depending on the manner in which you ask those questions, you effectively are giving instructions. Then I think item 6, on leadership is taking the difficult decisions. I do think that we're all human, we've all got a very strong emotional side to us, but at times you have to do some very, very, very difficult things. Those who have run companies, I'm sure the day that you fired the first person in your life, you went home and you couldn't sleep, right? Because you felt, what an awful thing I've done. But tough decisions and difficult decisions are essentially at the core of leadership. I'm sure you've met people. They don't have to be people running companies, even in your close circle. There's some people who just don't like difficult situations, right? When they have to deal with a difficult matter, they rather run away. On 5, he doesn't pitch up. Because they know that you are going to put them in a difficult situation, all right? And it's human beings. And I know even very senior people that have got a lot of experience, when they have to take that difficult call to say, Maurice, no, sorry, we cannot do this. I apologize, but we cannot do this. There's some people who are just incapable of doing that. They will run around and you never see them until you get the message through osmosis that maybe he's not interested. That's not leadership. It's how do you take those difficult decisions that might be unpopular, but as long as you are comfortable that they're well thought out, they're fair, and they're in the long-term interest of the organization, whether it be a business or political or church or whatever it is. Just have to pray for the wisdom of Solomon in those kind of calls. Then I think the 7th and last aspect is the issue of fairness and integrity, because out of everything that I've said in the first 6 points, we are not infallible. We are given at times to impulsiveness, and even on occasion, a sense of the heart ruling the mind. If you weren't that, then you'd be a robot. But you always, at all times, have to have this internal self-correcting mechanism that you need to try and deploy to say, have I really been fair to X, Y, Z? I have to take this decision, and this, in a business sense, sometimes it will affect the family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you don't take that decision lightly. So a sense of fairness, and of course, integrity is absolutely the common thread that runs through everything that I've said, in the sense that whether you like it or not, you lead by example. And if you don't set the gold standard yourself, you de facto undermine the ability to say anything to anybody that is a value judgment. And we take these things for granted, but these are true. Because if you don't do that, it spreads, and it spreads like cancer. And Maurice, it was just very interesting, one of the slides that you put up there, it was about corruption, and it just brought a small little anecdote I have on something that happened. I think it was in 2002 or 3, where we were having problems in Nigeria at MTN, and I went to see then President Obasanjo. And I remember that discussion. I mean, we of course spoke the business and all the problems that we're having and so on. Then we started talking generally about, how are things in South Africa and so on. And he said to me, the day that corruption starts in South Africa it will spread like cancer. You will not be able to stop it. And so we listened to him, etc., etc. It was myself. In fact, I was with the current deputy president. He was chairman's, MTN's chairman at the time. So when we left, our attitude was, it's just another jealous West African, jealous of South Africa, because in 2002, 2003, everything was on the up, everything was flying. Honestly, I sit today and I remember those words from him, because what you described there is exactly what he was warning of, but they had seen it for the last 30 years. So it was, I think, an apt example of coming back to my point 7, which is integrity from a leadership perspective is totally indispensable, because unless that is embedded, you then fail to control how everything else basically evolves. It just comes outside your control of issues. So I think those really are my personal 7 cardinal points. I'm not saying, therefore, this is the Holy Grail and the Holy Word. No, I'm saying that I would judge the unleashing of leadership to be premised on those 7 things in that particular sequence, because I think if they're not in that particular sequence, I would question whether there is any roadmap that you're actually following. Not to say you'll get there, but at least I think this gives a roadmap. I could go on for 2 hours, but I was given 20 minutes or so, and I just thought at least let me share that little bit. And I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. First question, I think from Bulelani, was about vision. How do you communicate it? This is absolutely pivotal. Again, if you'll forgive me, I will use an example of real life experience. Is that when I got to MTN as an example, there were many versions of the brand, not only in South Africa, but in the 1 or 2 countries that we were in. And you may recall, I then recruited a lady called Santi Bota. She used to be at ABSA. She had just finished the integration of what constituted ABSA, because ABSA was different banks. And they got into their brand. And I felt that people waking up in the morning, coming to MTN, have to have, first of all, a very concise sense of purpose. And secondly, the brand is just a manifestation. It's like a Mercedes-Benz has got the sign at the front, but it's really not the sign that's driving you, it's that engine that's in there. They need to have that well clear, articulated. And we had that for many years. We said, we are going to be the largest provider of telecommunications in emerging markets. So that was our vision, of connectivity. And that way we communicated that throughout the whole organization. We had a yearly leadership conference, so we'd take the top 200 people from all the 22 countries. We'd meet, we'd get outsiders to debate with us and so on. A lot of internal communication. We used to have what we used to call yellow stars. So once every year, we'd get the top 50 performing people out of the entire group, from whatever part of the world that they're in. And that created this integrated vision. A lot of companies have got vision, but are those staff members actually living those visions? Do they really believe in that vision? And we'd like to believe that we did. So it was multifaceted, but the essence of it was to make sure that everybody was facing the same direction and had an unequivocal understanding of what the mission statement was. So I think we did that. Second question about from Mashinini about what is effective networking and what is a corrupt practice. That's a very, very interesting question, and I'll tell you why is that what people expect in Nigeria at Christmas time, what people expect in Yemen during Ramadan, and where you want to put a base station in the north of Afghanistan, what that person expects are three different things. And they've got three different values. And this is actually a very interesting question. We were just discussing it I think 2 days ago, is that we've got, as a company, a very tight gift policy that says you cannot give a gift to anybody, to a minister or supplier, whatever, beyond 1,000 Rand or whatever the number is of a gift. Now, if I am Minister X in Uganda or whatever, I actually feel offended that MTN brings me a box of 2 shoes or something and says, here's your Christmas present. Okay, now this is this MTN policy, let's say. So it becomes very difficult, and what we try to do is to have a group-wide policy, but we then have to adopt that policy for cultural sensitivity for each country, because there are certain things that just because you do them this way in Johannesburg and Durban, Cape Town, you can't go and transplant that in the Middle East. They take umbrage to some of that. So we just try and do it in such a manner that whilst it's not one size fits all, it is the issue of appreciation within that cultural context that we allow people to do that. Okay, the third and last question was about, the scariest leadership choice, I think was the question. You know, I can't say, I appointed somebody and that was really, really scary. But I can just say that allied to the earlier question that when I was talking about culture, is that cultural sensitivity is so important. You may get a telecoms engineer, network engineer who is absolutely fantastic. He is bright, he's brilliant. But you put him in the middle of Ghana or Syria, whatever, and within a month or weeks, you start getting the reports. This guy is culturally insensitive, and all of that, and all of that, and all of that. And there have been cases where you have either the CEO or somebody who just didn't fit, not because they're technically incapable of doing their job, but they were not, emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence and street smartness, that part of their brain just didn't exist. And it could cost you a whole business. So we had a lot of those cases. Again, it comes to leadership and judgment, right? It's about judgment to say, even though, XYZ, Peter is the best, and if I want him to roll out a network in Iran, I'd rather have him because I know he can do a good job. Paul or Sipo or whoever is not as good, but you know what? One thing I know is that he's got good judgment. And he can fit into that society and make things work. It might not happen as fast as we want, but at least we know that we'll have a good franchise. Yeah, look, I think that the first question from Jabu, which was about, because I did say that we're all not infallible. We make calls at times that we think are basically well-meant. And in hindsight, realize that it was really an error of judgment. What do you do then? This is why when I was talking about the Socrates method of asking questions and get input, it's partly to try and get consensus. And by the way, you can't run business by consensus entirely because, you'd have no business. But you try the best to try and get buy-in so that you take the organization with you. And if you, for instance, don't try and get buy-in up to a certain point, but if you are the kind of leader who doesn't get buy-in, you know what human beings are like. Then just say, okay, let's see. Let's make a decision. When it all comes crashing down, I say, sorry, boss. You know? It's like, we knew this was going to happen. He's very arrogant. He doesn't ask questions. But if they feel a sense of input, and by the way, in my vocabulary, it's different from a collective, because a collective is, we're all going to take this decision collectively. And that I don't agree with. There is a difference between getting input and then the buck needs to stop somewhere. They need to be decisive. I've taken the decision. But I have made an effort to get your input. As to, we took this decision collectively. So when it collapses, nobody's responsible. And when you've had that input and there was a genuine mistake, you then say, we think that there was an error of judgment here, and I accept that I made a mistake, etc., etc., etc. So I think it's all about transparency, and that's really what people are looking for. Second question, books. I mean, we can talk a lot about books, and as usual, when you sit here, you can't remember all the books, but just off the top of my head, I don't know how many of you know Sheikh Anta Diop. He's a Senegalese Egyptologist, and there are too many African Egyptologists, just ironically, a lot of them are in France or US or whatever. But he's an African Egyptologist, and he wrote the book, The African Origins of Civilization. I think it's one of the seminal books I read many, many years, but certainly in my mind, it is a foundation-creating book because, and I'm not an educationist, but what I think is problematic in a lot of African curricula is that we start teaching kids history from 001 AD, right? Just after Jesus Christ disappears. But what about the 4,000 years BC? Because that 4,000 years BC is really the essence of the people sitting in this room. And it is the campus creator for you. And if I was Minister of Education for a day, that's really what I'd do. I would say you must start the curriculum of 4,000, 5,000 years BC in the schools now. The kids shouldn't get to school, university for that matter, not in high school, before they start understanding the timeline. Because if you don't understand, Egyptology, you don't understand the timeline for Judaism, you don't understand, Buddhism, Islam, well, in fact, then Christian, then Islam. If you don't understand the timeline, your conceptual perspective, what I said is the world view, is totally misplaced. So I think that is fundamental. I just forget the name of the author, but the book is called Why the West Still Rules for Now. That is far more recent. It really looks at the fact that before the industrial age, with the steam engine, the Chinese were, of course, as a civilization, relatively speaking, and I'm now talking more recent as opposed to BC, we're far, far, far advanced. It was really the steam engine that changed a lot of things, including that they decided to close China to any external intervention and input. So that's another important book. So I can always give the list and people can get it as they want. Yeah. I think third and last question was on the self-correcting mechanism. What is that? I think that's also a very long discussion, and many philosophers and various psychologists come to it in a different way, including religious people as well. So just to give you 3 examples, somebody like Carl Jung, for those who've done psychology, he calls it, of course, the subconscious, the yin and the yang inside you that's got that balance. In other words, every human being sitting here has got a total evil side to them and a totally supreme element to them. It is that mechanism where you decide that balance, that choice, right? So you can look at it that way. If you look at Christian philosophers like Saint Augustine, that's really what all his work was about, right? So whether you want to look at it from a religious context, from a scientific context of the Freuds and the Carl Jungs and so on, they're all talking about very much the same concept, that there is a self-correcting mechanism that everybody is capable of. There is instinctively something that you say, this was actually wrong. I shouldn't have fired him because I didn't like his shoes or whatever and the way he spoke. But actually, when I looked at the facts, I shouldn't have fired that person. So that's what I was talking about when I talk about self-correction. But as I said, that is quite a subject on its own that we could spend 2 days talking about. First of all, I think, Victor, how do you know that, you're ready to lead as a black man? Look, Victor, I think a lot of people do not want to accept that luck plays a lot in life. Of course, I think it was somebody who says, again, it's not somebody that I like a lot, but I thought his statement was good. Those who are older may remember. We used to say, the harder I practice and the harder I work, the luckier I become. Yeah. And I think he was telling the truth. Yeah. That, there is an element of increasing your prospects of getting where you need to get to. But you cannot, it would be an exercise in naivety to say fortune as well doesn't play a role. It does play its role. But you need to apply yourself and apply your effort. When you say, well, how do you know that you're ready to lead? Well, I guess there's also a sense of self-worth. I started off with this worldview. And I think, certainly in my mind, it played a very important role. When I got to the US, I went firstly to the engineering school, to Ohio State, which is one of the best of engineering schools. And of course, middle America was totally very, very typically white. When I was in Atlanta, as you know, Atlanta University, which is today Clark College, W.A. Du Bois, depending whether you're French or not, or Du Bois, started that school. And of course, his whole history. His whole history was really just about the centrality of the black race, how to look at the world, and so on. Whether you are younger here and you've read a lot of Steve Biko and so on, all those things matter because they put into perspective who you are and what you should be doing and whether you should be second-guessing yourself. You should not be second-guessing your capability, right? And that plays a long way. So I don't think that there was a moment to say, now we are ready. I think a set of circumstances came together that gave me the opportunity, and I took the opportunity. So I think that's the best that I can answer that question. The second question was, what do you look for in a leader and a manager? That is also a very difficult question. First of all, there should be no compromise on competence, by and large. I'm not saying that you always have to get the absolutely A person, but you need to be comfortable that the person is actually capable of doing the job. Once you've ticked that box, it comes back to these things that I was talking about. Is the person, is their intense, emotional intelligence decent? Because they are going to work with people as well, right? And And if they don't have that sense of being able to read other personalities, have a fair sense of judgment and all of that, I personally would tend not to appoint the person. And we also get it wrong. I mean, nobody ever gets this perfectly right, nobody, you know. But you obviously try to get it right as frequently as you possibly can, and you have to look at all the attributes of that person once you have decided that they are actually quite competent to do the job. Because obviously if they're not competent to do the job, you don't even go into step 2. So that's the way that I would look at that. Destructive people. You know, there's some people who've got an incredible drive, are incredibly capable, but they are destructive. I mean, if I was running a firm, for instance, I'd never employ Donald Trump. Right? I've never met the man, but you can see that he is a destructive wrecking ball, right? There's never anything positive to say about anybody. He is totally self-centered. It is rare that the reference to anybody, even when there's praise, does not have some link back to him. So the narcissism is terrible. Now, you cannot take away the fact that he's created this huge property empire. He must have something, all right? But coming back to destructive bodies, so it's somebody like that who, maybe because their capability is good and solid, you could get tempted, but he's maybe the entrepreneur's entrepreneur, because you can see that he can only work in an environment where only he is in charge, totally in charge. He's not sort of a team player. Maybe I'm being unfair on him. I don't know the guy. I'm just talking about what I see and what I listen to. So those destructive people, irrespective of possibly their absolutely sterling capability, I would not appoint. And if you discover late, then you try and find some function for them which is not a line function and that doesn't involve people. Go and give them filing or something like that. Going to the last 2 questions, I'm going to be a little bit coy because these are ongoing matters, and MTN is a publicly listed company, and I'm its executive chairman. So I can't say anything that tomorrow some investors say, well, you never said that when you were at the AGM. But to try and answer your question without making much hair out of it, let me just say what's there publicly. I mean, basically, as you know, we are at variance with the government. This is why we went to court. Why did we withdraw the case? We withdraw the case because they said, okay, let's get into settlement discussions, which they wouldn't have done if our case was useless. And it's an ongoing matter, let's put it that way. And we'll take our time. The ball is in the court. I mean, you all read newspapers. They've got their own internal discussions at the moment, and we'll await the outcome of that discussions. Our position is not unknown to them. So let me leave it that way. Eric Holder works for Covington. He's the ex-Attorney General in the US. And Covington is one of the firms that we're using. There are many firms. There are a lot of Nigerian firms that are part of the team. But Covington obviously specializes in cross-border matters of this nature. And I guess because he was the ex-AG, his name comes up, naturally as a very high-profile person. So I think that's really where I am on that. I don't want to, say too much more on that one. Then on the last and final question about, I think, Amma, your question was about a vision, how do you pass it on and so on. Look, if we've done a decent job, which I hope we have, because, and this is all documented. In 2003, we had our annual strat session for MTN at a place called Livingston in Zambia. And that is where we crafted a strategy that says, you know, if we're going to continue growing at this rate, etc., and realize the vision, what do we need to do? And we came up with a very clear vision that resulted in a team working for almost half a year, looking at all the mobile licenses in the world, rating them in terms of internal rate of return, which one would give us the best value, and so on. And that's how we ended up going to places like Iran. You know, it wasn't just waking up one morning and saying, okay, there's a license in Iran, let's go. There was a lot of planning that went into that. But to get into your answer, you know, specifically is that over that period, you then hope that the vision and the mission is totally shared. So when you've got a successor, it's not as though they're starting from scratch. They've been an integral part of that vision over the period. Now, can they change it and go a different direction? Of course. I think when you're CEO, you've got that latitude where you can change the course and say, I don't like this course, I like that course, and I need to take my board with me, and so on. Hopefully that answered your question. Thank you very much. It was really an honor. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening. I hope you have learned a lot. You've gained insights. You've reflected on your own leadership. You continuously learn and develop your own leadership values, competence, and skills. And I encourage you to use this lockdown period to self-reflect and continuously sharpen your leadership skills. Why? Because we need leaders in this time of crisis. Not only the leadership of the president, but your leadership as an individual in your area of influence, whether it's your home, your school, your business, your company, your project, your NGO, your community-based organization. All of us have to rise up and lead this nation out of this deep crisis we're faced with. So at ULP, we want to make it easier for you to continuously improve your leadership skills and talents. We've created an app, and I urge you to go and download it from Google Play Store and use it, share it, discuss it with the friends, and form study groups so that we can continue to develop leaders that will take this country forward and take this continent to reach our 2063 agenda. Thank you very much. May God bless you, and may God keep you safe, and may you remain healthy. Thank you.
Unleashing Leadership Potential's mobile app will enable you to view and listen to our monthly leadership conversations about leadership development through engaging with prominent ethical leaders, hearing their stories, and learning from their successes and failures. Access premium content and teachings for a small subscription fee. By downloading the app, you can access teachings from Maurice Khadebe, access monthly free content, exclusive Q&A sessions, stay up to date on our up-and-coming events. Download the app now.